Hi, I'm Tanya, and I wanted to thank you all for really interesting and informative and great narrations. I really appreciated and enjoyed what you all had to say. And I think this does apply to all of you, because I was thinking that one parallel among many is kind of the role of history. I was thinking there's a history of people, the history of spaces, and the history of technological development kind of embedded in your different stories. So I was wondering how you engage history with your craft. And I think one of the final things you said, Tariq, and I quoted it, there's no ahistorical way to pursue craft. And I really thought that's pretty profound. So I thought, could you all talk a little bit about how you engage history in your craft and what it means to you? What does it look like?
Start from here? Okay. All right, and I go first. Well, really, fantasy, fiction, science fiction, it's all a reflection of reality, a reflection of history as it was, the present as it is, the future as it may be. And so when you critique these things, you can't go in blind as to history, as to what's happened before, what's come before, who's come before. Otherwise, you go in with a very unbalanced, lopsided, lacking point of view. So I know all of us, if we, one, check each other, and two, check ourselves and make sure we go in knowing all of the facts and as much as we can about whatever we're critiquing, whatever we're talking about. And any time we see someone else put out something that is just willfully ignorant of the history of things, a lot of times you'll see popular media depicting violence against people of color, violence against women, just willy-nilly, with no consideration as to how that reflects our past and how that may ultimately affect the future. So I don't know if that was a full answer, but it feels like one, so I'm going to stop.
Don't drop the mic. I guess when I think of history and at least Flower House, it's kind of shortened history, and thinking like the vessel I used was a house, and bought it on auction. There was like plywood. They're not like, here you go, here's your key. Like, you had to like do the drill, take it off. And when we opened up the door for the first time, it's like I had no idea what to expect, but I certainly didn't expect like garbage piled up to your knee and finding like nests where like animals and people had lived. Like there was one room that was totally gross. Like these things where you go in there and you're like, whoa, I didn't really think what would happen to the house after I used it for the project until we got in there and it like hit you. You're like, wow, people lived here. This was a home, very much what the video kind of reflected. And so I think it was at that point where it felt very natural to continue the project, do the celebration, fill the house with flowers, and then bring it down and let it grow again. But, to really honor that it was a house and it's not just, like a vase I used for a wedding, and it's like Saturday night, woo, and then off to the recycle bin.
With my craft, if you will, I think the as far as history goes, the thing that stands out for me is what I do. We see a lot of like the same crap being repeated. Like every time we have some new technological revolution, first it was like, wow, we have networks, and then we found a whole bunch of problems with them. And then we had web applications, and we found a bunch of problems with those. And like we forgot everything we learned the first time. And then we went to things like mobile, and we forgot everything we learned with web applications, security-wise, right? Probably even design and development-wise. But as far as computer security goes, we just keep making the same stupid fucking mistakes like over and over and over, and everyone just seems to forget it. So now it's like, go mobile. Now we're on the Internet of Things, which is a culmination of all those other things put together, and we're starting from scratch again. So for me and people of like kind of my ilk, we look back at like, hey, dum-dum, like why did you not just do the fundamentals that we learned 30 years ago? Outside of that, it's things like looking back at just how from a ethical and political side, how we've used or abused technology and compromising technology from a security standpoint to disrupt nations or disrupt social causes or political activists and stuff, and how do we make that not a problem going forward? How do we help secure those people from the bad people, so that people don't have to worry about, whistleblowing and things like that? Like, let's just move the marker a little bit further each time. So I think that's probably the best I can do.
Yeah, to go off what Zach said, I think a lot of times, and what we highlight is this desire to be quick and fast. I think we often sacrifice a lot because we want to be the first to do something or the best to do something quickly. And so really what it goes down to is we need to be patient. I think more patient in what we do and what we create. So for example, if we had taken, there are a lot of situations where if you just take a few more moments to think a little bit more rationally and consciously about the things you're about to engage in, yes, you may not be the first person to do the thing. You might be the first person to do it right, though. Also, I think of a Drake line, which is sorry. It's not who did it first, it's who did it best or who did it right. So, not to quote Drake, which I just did, but I can't undo that quote, right? I didn't think about it and wasn't patient, so I can't undo the Drake quote. It is now a part of my life. And so, if we think about that in terms of organizations, corporations, et cetera, people are so desperate to be the first or the best or create something so quickly that they often throw a lot of people under the bus and then don't think about how that's harming them. When if you just thought about it, maybe another day or another week or another month, there are ways in which you could have avoided a lot of the backlash. It wouldn't be part of your history anymore. And so when we talk about apolitical history or ahistorical things, we can avoid damaging and harmful histories by taking more time to be cognizant of what we're doing, how we're doing, and how we're engaging with people.
So, to kind of reference my presentation, when I first got this email that kind of shook me and I didn't really know what to do, I was kind of panicky and I shared it with a few friends who were helping me to produce the event. And they were like, why don't you call that lady who lives there and have her come up? It was I'm not going to tell you who these people are that were giving me these suggestions because it's even embarrassing to tell the story. But I'm like, you are literally just telling me to call a black floral designer and have her speak. It was that is not how we're going to fix this. I mean, so I know how not to do it. Let's take this.
Oh shit! This is since it's kind of I'm often a different spot as far as this whole kind of panel goes. The best that I could say is going to kind of go off on a little bit of a weird direction tangent, but as far as we have a big problem in information security, my realm of this whole idea of hacker rock stars and stuff. And one of the things that we've, as sort of a community, have tried to do is because there's the scene and then there's the industry, right? But the community / scene has tried to foster things more women in information security, more minorities in information security, more students in information security, that whole STEM type of thing, and get rid of the idea that just because you're some 60-year-old, this is not an ageism thing, I'm just saying you're some 6-year-old well-established cryptographer guy, you should be paid $100,000 for a speaking engagement and not allow this up-and-coming person to be able to present at something. So being able to try and eliminate that sort of egoism around hackers and stuff. So it's we've made progress, I think, but yeah, I don't really know how to actually solve it except just keep forging ahead in that way.
Yeah, I think a big way to avoid tokenism is to, again, with the be patient, but I think it's just like so going back to the slides I was presenting was be committed. So this idea that I'm not seeking you out, for example, Lisa was saying like I'm not seeking you out because you're just like this person who fits a bill, but that you are somebody that I'm gonna engage with, and I'm gonna keep checking on, I'm gonna keep being there and engaging with over time because. So I'll give a good story. Is so I was going to be booked for a show in Poughkeepsie. I got booked for a show in Poughkeepsie last year to do some poetry, and they had booked me and a fellow Palestinian man who is like also white passing like I am. And so I was like, actually, if there's just two of us speaking, can you not have him speak because he was also more like well off because they were just it was my show pretty much and they wanted to like bring somebody else on. And I was like, well, if you could, I prefer a woman of color to be on this show, et cetera, et cetera. Ideally a queer person because it wasn't like a Palestinian thing. It was a diversity. It was like it was a lot of different kinds of intersections against using like words, using poetry to as a form of resistance. And so I didn't want there to just be like one monolithic voice there. I wanted there to be multiple people. And so they brought up, I suggested a few people, but also they came up with somebody named Roya Marsh, who was a really cool, like amazing poet out of New York. And we went and did a show together. I don't know what happened in terms of like how they compensated each of us, but I know that we had that show, did it, and like that's somebody I would like text every couple months, just check in, see how she was doing, see how like what was going on with her, how her life was, because like I enjoyed the experience of like getting to have a conversation with her and build a conversation on stage for a bunch of people we'd never met before. And then, like, lo and behold, like several months later, and this is why I say the consequences aren't always apparent, but they do manifest themselves. We just competed in a poetry slam together at a competition regionally and came in second place in the entire thing for the region. So, like, and she's like one of like the most engaging, like, genius people I've ever. Like, she wrote a poem that day and then performed it, memorized, and like crushed an entire stage with it. So, like, you don't always foresee or forecast how the people you meet will open the door for other people you meet. But like if you can engage and commit with at least one person, and I think that's good for what like the organizers are saying here, meet a new person here today and keep talking to them, get engaged with them, whatever, they will introduce you to more people over time. Just think about who you are, what deficiencies you have in your identity in terms of like, not in terms of like deficiency like as in we lack something, but more like what spaces do I not inhabit? What spaces do other people inhabit, and how can I ethically talk to them and not just treat them as like a token and be like, hey, you're a black person, let's be friends. It's more like, hey, we connect on this thing. How else do we connect? But yeah.
So for me, you acknowledge that it's going to take work. It's going to take effort. It's not going to be easy. If it was easy, then more people would probably be doing it. And you have to create a safe space for that person because oftentimes people who from marginalized groups are putting themselves at risk when or even if you are not going to intentionally do them harm, you can do it unintentionally, or the person may not know whether you are or not. So they'll be hesitant. Understand that people may say no, they don't want to engage with you. And just be open and listen and know that chances are you are going to mess up somehow. And the key is to listen, apologize, and learn, not get defensive. Any harm that you do, it's better to apologize for that and to figure out how to fix it and avoid it in the future as opposed to save face. And it just takes time. It takes effort. It's going to take more than one person. Just don't talk to one person because that's how you get tokenism. You talk to one person and get one perspective. So you treat these groups of people as if it's a monolith. So yeah, just start reaching out to people and don't get discouraged if people say no or when people say no. And just talk to people like they're a person. Don't these are just other people who look or love or believe differently than you. And also if you find that they are harmful in some way to you, it's okay to kill that relationship and move on to someone else. And truly harmful, not like, oh, they said something I don't like, they hurt my feelings. But like if they're truly harmful, then you can say like, okay, thank you so much, this was great. And we are moving forward with another candidate, thank you. But yeah, hopefully that helped.
Voices in the room for collaborating on larger things, let's say for companies that have a lot of reach. So there was, I mean, Pepsi had their stupid thing. Was it Dove or somebody had another like Howard type of thing? It was like a really just how it got out of that room and into the space. The goal is to get those diverse voices. Hiring is a big part of that, but beyond that, so to bring it to me, I work for Michigan Medicine, so we're part of the health system here, and there are it's white guys in lab coats in terms of hiring for a lot of research positions, things like that. We're trying to work on that as a communication department. But how do you get, other than just hiring, before hiring, how do you make the job of working in those offices or in those kind of spaces, marketing, communication, PR, how do you tap into these different communities, diverse communities, to make those seem like appealing jobs where you can have a voice and an impact, and it's not just because we do get, so as part of hiring, we do get a sort of diverse group of applicants, but how does, it's on LinkedIn, it's on Glassdoor, like,
So you have to do a bit more legwork because the people are out there. There are plenty of people of color, people from marginalized groups who are excellent marketers, PR people, all of that stuff. But one thing, income can make it difficult for people. You may have people who don't have any internships on their resumes because they can't afford to do unpaid internships because they had to pay their way through college or they have to support families, so they can't take a year to live somewhere and not make money. You also have, one cultural fit is a way that a lot of people get weeded out as well. And then also you have to, it can be a way that you weed people out in the hiring process because you're like, oh, I don't know if you'll necessarily fit in here. And then another way is people may join your team and then it turns out that in ways that you didn't recognize, the environment is very hostile. So they leave, they warn other people away because a lot of these communities, especially when they're people of color, we kind of cling to each other and we let each other know. It's like, okay, well, this company, they're like low-key kind of racist or they're very sexist or it's like some places will have like a very bro-y culture. And so people will definitely avoid those. So one, you have to look at what your environment is, and two, you have to actually reach out to people and examine what you're what you're actually looking for in a candidate consciously and subconsciously, because you may not even realize where you're ruling somebody out for something and you've just missed out on potential good, excellent hires because it's something you didn't even recognize that you were, a discrimination point that you didn't even recognize you had. And I know for marketing especially, there are minorities in media. That's a group that is a gathering point for all, just minorities in media. And it takes a lot more legwork, and you can't they aren't always going to come to you because they don't necessarily know where, or even if they know where you are, they may get weeded out before you even get a hold of them. And it's, you can, LinkedIn is wonderful as it is, pictures and names, people rule out people with certain images, certain pictures, people rule out people with certain names, and we all know this when we apply for jobs. So yeah, just do more. The answer is always legwork, extra legwork.
Yeah, I think and Brittany made good points about it's not only just important to be conscious of how you're hiring, but the retention. So once somebody gets there, I know a lot of friends who will get to a space, then they're like, yeah, this place was really toxic, or this place was really violent, or people just keep dismissing me just for being different there. Or they had no friends there because everybody was just so similar in their own cliquishness that they didn't want to stay there. So they didn't get fired or anything, but they chose to leave. And so it's important to start doing the work internally to be how are we deficient in these ways, but also I think hiring practices are pretty outdated to begin with in the first place. I think a lot of times when I got hired at my job, I saw one person of color in my hiring process, and she left a month later. And she was the person I had connected with really well. But everybody, it was just a weird thing where they just kept putting me through a gauntlet of multiple people who all happened to be white. But additionally, it was interesting because with that position, with that company, like the hiring process was really indicative of the place I ended up working in, because like 90% white people, if not 95%. And advertising is also different because it's actually a lot. It's actually there's a lot more women who work there than there are men, but the women don't even occupy C-suite. So it's like this very weird dichotomy of like how intersections interact with each other. So you have diversity in terms of like gender, but then who has power, and who's engaging with spaces, who's creating the hiring process. So I think there's just like so many ways to like disrupt that. So for example, instead of doing a filtering system, for example, I got filtered out a lot of jobs out of college because my GPA wasn't as high as it could be. So numerically I got filtered out. But if there was a way where people would maybe do, we're going to just like take a handful of just these applications, regardless of what they say, and just read them by hand or by eye, you're probably going to find at least a few people you like that would have been weeded out because of the numerical standpoints of that stuff. So there's always ways to disrupt and get creative of how you engage and meet with people. I just think it takes, again, like Brittany said, legwork, but create the spaces that are comfortable for people to engage with in the first place, because there's also word of mouth. I can't really recommend places I work if I know that I can't handle being in them myself, but it's just like there for a paycheck. So word of mouth is huge. Like people want it. So like aside from LinkedIn, if you have, like I was talking about with the tokenism, you meet people who will eventually introduce you to other people. So just like opening yourself up in that way, creating spaces that people want to be in is a great way to diversify and just like have that become. So when you're actively including people, it kind of takes them out of its own and works for itself eventually.
So actually, that really dovetails nicely, but also the broy culture thing. There's in obviously like in security and in tech, we have a lot of that. Like I don't know if you've ever worked at a tech company. I'm not calling anyone out in particular, but like every tech company I've ever worked in, basically. Not that any of them are here today, but that's not the point. But it is a common problem, and it does make, like, we're trying to foster bringing in people who aren't white dudes. As far as like the tech side of thing goes, a friend of mine, Lee Honeywell, is actually part of a thing called the Ally Skills Workshop as part of the ADA initiative, and the ADA initiative is designed to help foster like bringing more white dudes, like not just white dudes, into security and into tech. And there are initiatives like that. I know that said initiative twice, but like the Ally Skills Workshop is part of the AIDA initiative to actually teach people how not to be a dick, and be able to actually help make a safe, not like make a safe space so that we're all like, we can't say anything, but like if someone says, I don't want you like touching me, you go, oh, now I know how to handle that. I don't touch that person, rather than being like, go fuck yourself, right? Like, I mean, things like that. There are programs and initiatives out there. I'm sure they're outside of my little, myopic world that exist to actually help teach those skills, so that when you have a candidate that comes in who isn't a white dude, you know how to talk to them like a person and not like, oh, it's this, it's a very imposing black woman, or it's someone who's trans. Oh, how do I deal with that? Like, it makes you actually talk to them like a human and not like something else, not some kind of token, if you will. So there are, adainitiative.org, I think, is the site.
All right, so we're at 4 o'clock, but I know a million people have questions. We're going to have a question from Patricia here. Who would like to have the last question after that? Who feels they have the better question?
Somebody who hasn't spoken yet as well.
Yes. All right, we did it. We found someone who hasn't spoken yet. All right, Patricia, here you go.
Thanks. Hi, guys. I'm Patty. I produce The Moth in Michigan, and I kind of want to piggyback on what was just said or asked about diversity and inclusion. I was having this conversation at lunch, actually, with some of the other attendees here, and then you all spoke to it, and it was felt very timely. But as an international organization, The Moth is searching for how to be more diverse and inclusive, and particularly on the local levels with local producers like myself. but specifically in communities like Ann Arbor, where majority of our audience are white people, I am really, as a white woman, having difficulty figuring out how to further my responsibility as this producer to make my space as inclusive as possible for everyone to get to it. Since we are on NPR, it's perceived as this rich white person thing, and it's not. All of my hosts are people of color. I have 5 of them. All of them in Michigan are. And that's a tiny step in the right direction to getting a more inclusive experience for the public. And so I'm just wondering if anybody has any comment on that.
I mean, so I'm actually kind of familiar with that experience because I used to run the poetry slam in Ann Arbor, and I think part of it is like Ann Arbor is a pretty white city, just like that's a thing. In turn, oh wow, but also like the ways in which like in the township and like Ypsilanti and other places around it aren't that. And so, like, how do you find ways to? So, like, what are the barriers to entry? I think the first thing to ask is, like, what are the barriers to entry? Well, the moth people need to make a story to even show up. Like, unless you're about just audience members who come to watch, but usually people want to watch the things that they see themselves in. So, like, for the stories in terms of being told, people need to create a story first. I've been invited to moths like tons of times, but like, I never had the time to make a story. So like, who can you find that has the time to do the story? How can you like push them along, help them along to create those things? Same thing with like poems. Like I can't say I want different poems or different poetry or poets if the people aren't creating the work. So how do I help them create the work in the first place? And then there's also people who are creating the work, but they may not be in that city. So like, how do you expand your base to be more inclusive? How do you think about people who don't have cars or who don't have transportation access? Because I don't think there's many ways to get from Ypsi to Ann Arbor or from Detroit to Ann Arbor. Also, it's a little farther as well. But like, can you do carpools? Can you like organize like a little shuttle? Is there ways to, aside from just like developing the talent, bringing in the talent? If the space itself that you're in doesn't have those talents to begin with. So, I mean, the good thing is you have hosts that are doing that, but at the same time, there are a lot of barriers to entry, and I think I want to speak to like not just the moth, but like to larger things in general. There's barriers to entry in everything we do. I think we talk about like medicine or all these things. Like there are people out there doing the work, but there's also ways in which you can cultivate ways for younger people to eventually, maybe they don't get hired by you, but like, hey, you just like taught 10 people of color to write stories. So when they go somewhere else, maybe they have access to a space that they may not have engaged with first, and show them where their places are. So for example, there were people who I could like, so for example, I was less concerned with making the slam more diverse and more concerned with making people feel safe in spaces. So if I knew there were people in Detroit who like, I would prefer to come to my thing because it would make it more diverse. I would be like, well, there's a thing in Detroit that's like literally 20 minutes from your house or 10 minutes from your house. You should go to that thing instead, because while I would love you to come to Detroit, I also want you to have a place to express yourself. So like, while it's important that we want to be diverse ourselves, we need to also not be egotistical about it and be egoistical and like prioritize our desire to have spaces that are like filling quotas than we are to have like these people have places they want to be in. But yeah, so there's lots of things to balance. It's a balancing act.
I would be remiss if I did not mention this, as this is a technology conference, but the internet is a great place to connect and find people. And there are so many ways to live stream things now, which is a great way to kind of erase the barrier to entry. And a lot of people who may not most people have smartphones. So Facebook Live, yes, most of us have smartphones. And it's also been shown that a lot of people who otherwise would not have had access to the internet have smartphones, are on social media. Facebook Live is great. People like just doing an event on Facebook Live is sometimes even cheaper than doing it in person, because you don't need a full audience and space. You just need a space and a camera. And if that, you just need a phone. And so to beat a dead horse, legwork. So you have to go find them. You have to go look for the people. Because, I mean, I like NPR, and I know a lot of other Black people who like NPR, but I know some people who don't know that they like NPR yet, because they think NPR is just a bunch of like old white dudes talking about classical music and talking about politics. And it's like, no, that's not it. So you have to let them know like, we're here. We want you to listen to us. We want you to join us. We want you in this space. And it's harder because they don't realize it. They wouldn't otherwise know that this space is for them. But like if you put out hashtags or bat signals, if you put them out there, if you put them there, the people will come. What is that? Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. So yeah, if you hashtag it, they will come. Yeah, I feel like, yes, that's my answer.
I feel that as I've moved from, or I moved between being in business and it's like you give me money and I give you flowers, move into more kind of producing public events, whether it's the markets or art things or a conference. I feel more free there to just be honest and just say, like, I noticed that our holiday market, it's a holiday market in Detroit, and it was 60 vendors and all white. And I posted on, we would like to make this a more diverse event. Could you please spread the word that we would like more Black-owned businesses at this event? And it felt really weird to like post, like, is that okay? Like, can I just say that? And it's like, I'm just gonna say that because that's what I want. And so, I mean, I guess I don't know what situation you are, you know, allowed to say because you're speaking on behalf of the Moth, but I feel a responsibility as when I do public events that I want to say those things.
Did you get more Black businesses to show up?
Slowly.
Yeah.
We got one more question.
Hi, my name's Arenka. Thanks everybody for helping me get the last question. I'll try not to let you down. The pressure's really on. That being said, I know my question's for Brittany, but if you'll help me out, would you like a slightly more serious question or a much nerdier question? All right, nerd is good point. Good point. Okay. So I am unrepentantly a huge nerd. And as a queer woman, even though I love nerd media and pop culture, it almost always feels like a trap. And sometimes I'm just like, oh, I want to quit it, but I can't quit you. But I also know that the intensity of white privilege means I still have a lot more representation in media and comic books and everything. But even from that position of privilege, like I said, like sometimes I just can't even like engage with the media that I love. And I was wondering if you happen to have any like favorite coping mechanisms for consuming media with all the intense nonsense without hemorrhaging like so much rage you're spontaneously like setting your environment on fire.
Yes. So one thing I try to, as much as I can, I try to balance out the things that don't represent me. I try to find things that do represent me, which is hard, very hard. And, you know, I acknowledge my points of privilege as well. I'm a cis woman with hetero passing privilege because I'm bisexual. And so there are more places to see myself than there are for other people. And there are also less. And like, for example, I wanted to watch Jessica Jones, but my own personal trauma didn't let me finish that series. And there are a bunch of other, like, I'm getting frustrated with Star Wars because we've had 9 movies and I have 5 seconds of an unnamed Black woman in Rogue One, and then the quick shot of the horrified face of a Black woman in The Force Awakens as they explode her planet. Like, that's all I get. So self-care, just one thing we try to do especially is we try to, because queer representation especially for women tends to skew towards the male gaze a lot. So we try to find as many queer voices creating queer art to amplify as we can. So people can see themselves represented. And then also, like, there's another point of privilege because I'm thin. And so they're like, well, seeing a skinny Black woman on TV is easy. Ish, kind of. Easier. So, yeah, it's just you find safe spaces for you. Find your people, find your crew, and huddle up with them. I'm in a couple Like we have our big Black Nerd Problem staff chat, and then separate from that, we have one that's for women only. And then separate from that, we have a smaller group of women that we just like talk to each other and check in on each other, do things that you enjoy, do things that you like. And just, if you have to quit it, even if you like it, it's not worth the harm. Like Jessica Jones is good, but it wasn't worth the harm to just force myself through that entire series to just say that I made it through Jessica Jones. So yeah, if it's too harmful to you, and if you feel like you're losing more than it's worth, let it go. Life is too short. Just let it go. And yeah, there's always fan fiction. There's always fan fiction.
All right. On that note,
Can I add one thing? Can I add one thing?
yes.
Like that question definitely seemed like an answer to just that experience. But I wanted to say, like, as a person who is not a Black queer woman, there are ways, like, because a lot of us are not Black queer women or queer people here. There are ways for us to get involved to help create those spaces. So it's important for us, like, when we have privileges and things like that, you can like help create a space that you don't have to participate in. So it's also important. So like when we notice there's like missing spaces and missing like visuals like that, and you have some leverage, find ways to like find those people and say like, hey, how can I help you make that happen? I'm not gonna like insert myself in the space, but like I have some money, or I have some like a place to rent out, or a place I can like loan you for free or whatever. Do you want to use it so you can do stuff with your friends and like people who need it?
That's it.
Be allies.
Boom. All right, everyone, please give these four an amazing round of applause.